Well, hello and welcome to the Red Zone Warriors inaugural fantasy football show. I am your host, Rob Shiva Winner Smith, along with my co-hosts, Jim the Jimmer. I have a man crush on Cordarrelle Patterson, both of us hailing from the wonderful Centennial state of Colorado. And last but not least, Jay Cushman Corsel from the frigid bowels of northern Michigan. How we doing tonight, boys?
Reason.
Excellent. All right, so we want to go over a few things as our initial show here. Spend a minute talking about some kind of our history, why we came about this show, our fantasy football background, some terms and terminology you might be hearing over the next several months as we get into the fantasy football season. So Red Zone Warriors is actually a fantasy football league that's going on its 6th year. We're all friends, been in that league together. In the 5 years that it's actually passed, we have 3 fantasy football championships between us. I say between us loosely because this guy has yet to get one. All right, the Jimmer.
It's only been 2 years.
He's fair enough. He's only been in 2 years, so.
I have 2 of those.
Yeah, sadly, Jason has 2 of those. So moving right along. So we're in it's a 10-man PPR league, keeper league. So we're very familiar with PPR, keepers, and so forth, so feel free to send us any questions on such. We're actually getting into some high-stakes leagues this coming season. I'm going to use fantasy football guys to give them a shout-out real quick. Fantasy Football Players Championship. So we'll kind of let you guys know as we move along kind of the differences between the high-stakes league and just kind of our neighborhood league. And you know, preparation and competition-wise, how that's different and so forth. So we're looking forward to that. One thing we must bring up, because you will hear it several times as we go along through the next several months, is, you know, what the heck is a couch shot? So a couch shot is a shot, as you can see there. It's as disgusting as it looks. Goes down like battery acid. It's the base of it is Maker's Mark. We've got a splash of cranberry, splash of grenadine, salted rim, and a floaters of Bailey. So this came about in some drunken debauchery. We're trying to find some fun things to do in our fantasy football league. It's actually a punishment. You know, if somebody tries to draft somebody that's already been drafted or makes a horrible pick, or we try to settle a bet or whatnot, we end up taking a couch shot as a penalty. So if you hear that, you know what we're talking about. And remember to tweet us at Red Zone Warriors. If you have any questions as we go through the show, or just any questions in general. I've got the NFL draft here coming up in a couple weeks, but prior to that, if you have any keeper questions, kind of that time to start thinking about kind of the value of potentially keeping some guy in a certain, you know, area versus somebody else in a round, and we're happy to answer those questions or anything else related to what we're talking to. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next segment. We're going to cover the news and notes around the NFL. This is something that we'll do every week just to kind of keep everybody updated on what's going on. And we're going to call it Around the NFL with the Jimmer. And over to you, Jim.
All right, so let's talk about great things that happen in airports. Or, better yet, let's talk about the things that happen worse in airports. We invented the couch shot in the Las Vegas airport. Terrible idea. And now let's talk about something else that happened recently in an airport. I could just imagine Alden Smith's, you know, agent basically being like, hey, I got an idea. You need to have more Twitter followers. What do you got? He's like, oh, I can tweet bomb. Ah, pretty much what happened. Idiot gets himself arrested. He goes to jail. This is stupid, people. Really stupid. Jim Harbaugh, get a... Oh, I won't say the F-bomb. Get a hold of your team already. Anyways, moving on. We also have Chris Johnson. He just signed with the Jets for a 2-year deal. We'll get into that next week. That's kind of humorous. Hopefully Chris Ivory isn't too bitter about it. But moving on, we have a little rumor that Donald Trump is trying to purchase the Bills, and he's trying to move them to Canada or Las Vegas. Either one, I'll take either pick. But regardless, I think there's a "You're Fired" clip that should be played.
You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
All right, moving forward, Josh Freeman, he signs with the Giants. Basically, that makes him fantasy relevant because, you know, when you're a backup to a two-time Super Bowl MVP, I mean, in Eli Manning, I just see that, you know, he's going to have quite a bit of, you know, grandeur there because after the Buccaneers let him go and basically said you're not worth it for a redhead, this is what's going to happen to your career arc. Moving on, Chad, 85, a.k.a. Ochocinco, a.k.a. Johnson. He's going to be playing in the Canadian Football League. Hope to God he learned how to spell in French 85, which I have no idea what that number is. Moving on, apparently, and this is my personal favorite, just when you thought the Green Bay Packers weren't self-righteous enough, they went another step. They said, you know what? Screw Match.com. We got something better. We got the BackersPackersLove.com, where you can meet other Packer fans and Packer your Packer fans to your Packer delight. And with that, back to you, Rob.
All right, well, appreciate that from the Jimmer. Not sure how they're going to quarantine out the Lions and Bears fans and such Vikings fans from that website, but kudos for them for trying. So we're going to move right along here to the meat of our program. Like I said, we got the NFL draft coming up in a couple of weeks, so before that, kind of the biggest news in fantasy football is, you know, where the heck did the free agents go? So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so discussing some of the big free agent moves and how it affects from a fantasy perspective where those guys went and who's already in that existing team and who they left and, you know, how that's going to have ramifications on their fantasy value moving forward. So we're going to do this over the next 2 weeks. We're going to cover about 8 guys today, 6 running backs and 2 wide receivers, kind of getting into this debate. So if you have any questions, go ahead and tweet us at Red Zone Warriors. We're happy to answer any of those questions as we move forward throughout the show today. So we want to go ahead and start with a guy, LeGarrette Blount, going from the infamous New England Patriots, where he leaves Stephen Ridley and Shane Vereen, going over to the Pittsburgh Steelers, meeting up with Le'Veon Bell. We're going to discuss kind of, you know, our thoughts on how that affects Ridley and Vereen, as Blount. That's right. I always screw that up.
Oh, silent.
This is an Oregon fan, so it makes a lot of sense. We're going to take his word for it. But LeGarrette Blount, how that affects Stephen Ridley and Shane Vereen's value. Maybe they can get back to their, you know, 2012 numbers. And then, you know, how does it affect Le'Veon Bell? He's going into his second year. He was a rookie. He was a stud. You know, is he going to have a sophomore slump? Is Blount going to affect what he did last year and so forth moving forward? So, Jay, do you have any thoughts on Blount and how he's going to affect both the New England Patriots as he leaves and as he goes on to the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yeah. First of all, you hit the nail on the head when you said if Ridley can go back to his 2012 numbers. If this guy goes back to 2012, gets in that time machine and heads on back, you're looking at 199 points in standard leagues. He was 10th overall among running backs that year and 17th overall in fantasy points, period. So if he can get back to that, he'll be a running back 1 this year. He had 12 touchdowns last year, so that was in 2012, sorry. That was very good. Now, we all know about his fumble issues, and those are real. I mean, he fumbled 4 times last year, and he fumbled 4 times in 2012, and we all know that Uncle Bill does not like people who fumble. Shane Vereen is going to stay pretty much in the exact same role that he's been in for the past couple of years. That's catching passes out of the backfield. There's nobody there that competes with him to do that, so he'll be a good running back, too, in PPR leagues. That brings us over to Pittsburgh, where Blount, with an OU, went. He is going to spell Le'Veon Bell. I mean, Bell, he didn't play until week 4 last year, and he did only average 3.5 yards a carry through the whole year. But by the last 5 games of the season, he had 4 yards a carry. He also scored a touchdown in those 4 games. And 3 of those were goal line scores, so you know they're not afraid to put him in on the goal line. In a 13-game span that he did play last year, he had 20-plus touches in all but 2 of those games. That's 76% of the carries, so I don't see Blount break into that too much.
I kind of agree there. I think Blount, he's more of a talented running back as far as, that they've had there in the past, but, LeGarrette, he's not, the end-all be-all. Bell's the man there. He's a three-down back.
Yeah, wait a second. Let's look at the bigger picture here. We got, LeGarrette Blount, who essentially is taking on a Mike Tolbert role over at Carolina Panthers, and he's going to be stealing a lot of goal line, touches from Le'Veon Bell after he basically drives him down the field. So with that in mind, Jay, Le'Veon Bell, are we looking at like another Jonathan Stewart or D'Angelo Williams situation here? What's your thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I think Bell's still going to get the bulk of the carries. It's not going to be really a true committee situation. The guy, he is Pittsburgh's franchise back. I do agree with you that Blount, Jim, with your OU stuff, is going to steal quite a few goal carries, but I don't think he's going to get a lot of carries outside of the 20-yard line. I think Bell's going to be a running back, too, with upside this year. Blount, he's going to be a possible flex play if you're desperate. I don't think he's going to be much more than that.
Well, I think history shows that Blount does not have the hands of Mike Tolbert, so I think from a PPR perspective, he's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, like I said, he had 2 catches all of last season and 23 over his career, so he's not getting the ball, whereas Bell caught 45 balls last year in 13 games. So
yeah, I think in standard leagues, Blount could be a potential, flex play at best if you have some issues with some guys on the bench for a given week, that's out. But all in all, I think, Bell's, he's not going to lose his carries that much to Blount, and he's going to, fill in nicely there. So let's go ahead and we're going to move on. And remember, if you want to tweet us at the Red Zone Warriors, have any questions on the New England fantasy football, perspective, or Pittsburgh Steelers or whatnot, and how they're going to do in 2014, please feel free to tweet us any sort of questions you have on that issue. So I'm going to move on to Toby Gerhart. This was an interesting one. Toby Gerhart goes from the Minnesota Vikings, where he had to sit behind Adrian Peterson for the last 4 years. Really didn't have that much stats as far as his NFL career so far, because he's behind one of the best running backs of all time, and finds himself going over to the lowly Jacksonville Jaguars. And so how do we, kind of rank his fantasy value in 2014? Is he a guy that could potentially be your running back too? Is he a low-end flex? What do we think about him? So I kind of did some of the research on this guy. Because he was behind AP, I had to look more at his collegiate career, kind of do some research and to kind of figure out, what this guy's pedigree is. Is he really worth talking about? Does he have a potential as an RB2 for fantasy football? So what people kind of forget about this guy, or just never heard, quite frankly, is that Toby Gerhart was actually a second-round pick by the Vikings back in 2010. He came out of Stanford. He was actually a runner-up to Mark Ingram in the 2009 Heisman voting. In that Heisman year of his, he had almost 1,900 rushing yards. He had 28 rushing touchdowns. Over his career at Stanford, he set the mark as being having the third most yards in Stanford history at over 3,500 rushing yards. So the guy's got a decent pedigree. The color of his skin is something that's just stereotype or whatnot, but it's something that you wonder about as an NFL running back. But the reality is, when he did get his chances, like last year, for example, in Minnesota, behind Adrian Peterson, behind one of the top 10 offensive lines of that year of 2013, he had 36 rushing attempts. He had 7.9 yards per attempt over last season. So that's actually, it's phenomenal. He has really good numbers as far as after initial contact. He's not a small guy. He's 6'2", 235 pounds. So, hence why he got, 28, touchdowns in Stanford in 2009. So the guy's a baller. He's got a good pedigree. He's finally getting the chance that, all NFL running backs want, is being the guy in a certain environment. So Gus Bradley is the coach there in Jacksonville. He spoke really highly of Toby Gerhart at the NFL owners meeting, for what that's worth. He's quoted as saying, that Toby has the ability to be a 3-down back. I mean, he's a 3-down back for that team. Bradley believes they're going to run the ball at least 40% of the time. And when you crunch the numbers, 40% of the time for an NFL team, means they're going to have 28 to 30 actual rushing carries during that game. So if he's a 3-down back, we're looking at a guy who could have 15 to 18 touches throughout that game. He showed in Minnesota that he can have, he can catch 2 or 3 balls a game. He's got good hands. So this is a guy, it's relevant to fantasy, quite frankly. I mean, where do you, it's not so often in fantasy anymore with all the split backfields that we find a guy who's going to get 15 to 18 touches and be a 3-down back. So it's absolutely relevant. Some of the red flags with him going to Jacksonville is, frankly, Jacksonville's horrible. I mean, they were the 31st ranked team in rushing offense in the NFL last season. They only scored 7 rushing touchdowns. And coming from a team in Minnesota where they were 8th in that category, the offensive line is much different from Minnesota over to Jacksonville. Pro Football Focus, has Jacksonville as ranked as the 31st team in the rush, in the offensive line, which is horrible. And the Vikings are at 6. Granted, he came. Adrian Peterson was using the line there at the Vikings. So. The only thing the Jacksonville Jaguars have done during free agency to help shore up that line is they brought over our very own beloved, Zane Beadles from the Broncos. Hail to the Broncos. There it is, Centennial State. That's all they've done so far, so they definitely need to do some work. The NFL draft, their quarterback situation is pretty horrific as well. So, that's the kind of the downside of him going over to this, horrible team from Minnesota. But the reality is, even though he's been in the NFL for 4 years, he has a lot of tread left on those tires. He hasn't been banged up and so forth going behind Adrian Peterson. He ran a 4.440, in the combine, so he's got some wiggle, he's got some speed. And if a guy's going to get 15 to 20 touches in a potential game, I think we have to rank him as a potential low-end running back 2 in fantasy, and we'll kind of monitor his carries and so forth in the preseason.
Yeah, just a little bit to add to that. I mean, as a Lions fan, the guy's coming from Minnesota, so I got to see probably a little bit more of him than a lot of people that watch the NFL just because my team plays him twice a year. And the times that he did play, he is a straight-up beast, just like you said. The guy will run right over anybody that tries to get in his way. So definitely somebody to watch out for.
Well, and with that, I want to kind of add on to that. I mean, going back to his college days, the guy was the elite of the elite in the Pac-12 back then. I mean, he set the mark in as far as like power rushing, and that's what really alternated. In Jim Harbaugh back in the day when he was coaching, that was his power rushing offense was because of Toby Gerhart. So you look at something where he goes into a situation where MJD just left, and we're talking about him in a second. He's gone. He got hurt early last season, so yes, their numbers dramatically declined. I hate to say it, but the great white hope in Blaine Gabbert is gone. So now you actually have some other options here at quarterback. So wait a second, is he really going into that bad of a situation? I mean, is he an RB1? I don't think so, but I mean, he could potentially be an RB2 very easy, quite frankly, and if not, he's a flex. I mean, he's a strong candidate for there. So.
Yeah, he's I think we put him at a ceiling at a low end RB2, kind of see how it goes in the preseason. But he's definitely got a potential there. He's finally got the shot that he's always wanted of being a lead back. Unfortunately, it's for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So just remember, you can go ahead and tweet us at Red Zone Warriors. Have any questions on Toby Gerhart or his transition over to the Jacksonville Jaguars from Minnesota? Please feel free to let us know. I'm going to go ahead and move on to a guy who was has been the most coveted backup handcuff, if you will, the last 3 or so years. Ben Tate. Ben Tate's a guy who moved on from the Houston Texans, backing up Arian Foster, going over to the Cleveland Browns.
My name is Cleveland Brown, and I am proud to be right back in my hometown with my new family.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the reason he was the most coveted handcuff is not just because Arian Foster has had some injury issues the last couple years. He was looked at as probably the most talented backup on any NFL team as a running back. So he's a guy that if you had him, Arian Foster goes down, he can step into an RB1 role behind a very good offensive line there out of Houston. He had a lot of moments to shine last year when Arian Foster got hurt, and so just kind of look at his fantasy perspective going over the Browns. So Jim, what do you think about Ben Tate heading over to the Browns?
First of all, I love Ben Tate. I mean, the guy was drafted as the starter. He was brought in to be the Texans' #1 guy, and unfortunately that didn't happen. He got hurt in the preseason before his rookie year. And this other guy in the 5th round, I believe, got drafted, a guy at UCLA named Arian Foster. He blew up the scene. He took over, and he became the alpha male essentially in their backfield. And that was good. That was good for them, and that really worked out. And I'm willing to cheer on that one. Unfortunately, Ben Tate's time has kind of run its course there, and so he has to move on. And where's he going to get them checks? And he got them checks in the Browns. And they really gave him a prove-it contract. I mean, they said, hey, here's 2 years. It's incentive-laden, so basically show us what you got, show us what you can do. And he's in a great situation, quite frankly. I mean, after Trent Richardson left, Willis McGahee came in. The man only did 377 yards over the course of, the 2/3 of the games remaining. He was still their leading rusher. That's terrible. Yes, Josh Gordon's there. Yes, Brian Hoyer's throwing to him. Good God, there's so many things to think about there, but he's really coming into a good situation where I think he can prove a lot. Anytime you're given $46,000 per game to play, he's going to be in that game. I don't care underneath what scenario, but that's what's going to happen there. So let's look at some of the in the tangibles around him. He obviously has Mack coming back at center. He was he signed and got denied essentially to go to the Jaguars, but he's back. So their offensive line is kind of shored up and actually relatively impressive. Now, what's unique about the situation, too, is look at the coaching turnover, not to mention the whole executive turnover they had. You look at Kyle Shanahan, kind of got a famous dad, might have won a Super Bowl. Yeah. And basically he runs his own blocking scheme, and he ran it for the Texans last year. This fits Ben Tate perfectly. He's a one-cut rushing. And this is absolutely what they need to have him situated in. They just signed a fullback in Presley to take off the lead blocker, and, I mean, that's huge. So actually, I'm really excited about what his potential is here. The one thing, like I said earlier, is Brian Hoyer. Whoever the quarterback is, I mean, they're going to draft someone, and they're going to try and shoo him in for a while. But guess what this means? This is the royal, responsibility of handing the ball and saying, go this way. And that's basically what it comes down to. Because quite frankly, Brian Hoyer is nothing special. I think Robert and I actually are going to go ahead and try out for the team because I'm pretty sure I can make 3 out of the 5 throws that Brian Hoyer can make. But that's just me personally. So let's talk about fantasy value. Upside, we're talking an RB1. We're talking 1,500 yards and 10 TDs. Yes, in his career, he only has 10 TDs, but he had 4 last year. The career arc, starting position, I like it. I like where it's at. There's no one to steal the goal line. Touches from him. Downside, hey, he's cracked a lot of ribs. He played with 4 cracked ribs at one point. It was the 5th rib that took him out of the game finally. His ankle, he had to have it broken before he got pulled from the game. The man's not injury prone. The man is just a warrior, and he plays through a lot. I would kind of lean towards he went through a bunch of bad situations kind of with the Texans. You got a clean slate. You're in Cleveland, which I'm so sorry. I mean, you might as well have LeBron running the ball for you. Oh, wait, he took a trip to South Beach. Anyways, so with that, I think he's worthy of drafting at a low RB1 status, high RB2 status. So, Rob, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. I think, solid, high-end RB2 would be a good place to start him as of now. We'll kind of see how he progresses, but he's coming from an offensive line that was ranked 12th last year. So that's in the upper third of the league. The Browns have brought in just multiple weapons on offense. They have one of the best wide receivers that we've ever seen in Josh Gordon there, and they're clearly going to draft a quarterback, which is going to be head and shoulders above Hoyer. It's going to open up the offense. And frankly, Trent Richardson, 2 years ago had a phenomenal year there, behind that offensive line, and then he just kind of went on his merry way last year and so forth. So I think he's got some very good potential. He's, one of the most talented, free agent running backs that we've seen in the offseason being signed. He's going to a team where he's going to be the main guy. There's nobody behind him but, Willis McGahee, for crying out loud. I'm pretty sure turns 37 next week. So he's the guy there. He's definitely got serious upside. He's proven that he can be tough in the running game, play through injuries. So I think that's a good situation. Anything from you, Jay?
Yeah, first of all, Jim, for my friends in Cleveland, the LeBron crack, too soon, bro.
Too soon?
Too soon. Fair enough. Fair enough.
That was my kickball team name, Too Soon.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that Tate is going to be a possible RB1 this year. The guy, he showed signs of glory. And if he can have a whole season to do that, we'll see what Cleveland can do for him. Hopefully they get him a quarterback so that he's not the only show in town.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have any questions about that situation? Ben Tate and how it affects the Cleveland Browns, how it affects the Houston Texans, please feel free to tweet us at the Red Zone Warriors. So we're going to go ahead and move on to another kind of younger guy, and Rashad Jennings. This going over to the lowly Giants of last season, just had a horrific season behind Eli Manning, throwing I don't know how many interceptions and being sacked, 30-something odd times. So, Rashad's a guy who was sitting behind MJD for a couple, 2-3 years over in Jacksonville. Had a couple moments in the sun a little bit while he was there when MJD would go down. But all in all, you just really weren't quite sure of what kind of talent this guy had. He moved on to the Oakland Raiders behind the most injury-prone running back of all time history in Darren McFadden. So thus he had.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. So he had multiple games there where he got to be the main guy and kind of show his pedigree there. So Jay, what do you think about Rashad Jennings going over to the Giants with David Wilson there and his fantasy value potentially for 2014?
In one word, excited. Jennings has never entered a season before as the feature back anywhere. He's been in the league for 4 seasons now. He played 15 games in 2013. He only started 8 of those games. And he had 9 games where he saw at least 10 carries. And in those 9 games, he gained 670 yards. Caught 30 of the 36 balls he caught all season. That's 4.5 yards, actually 4.55 yards per carry. That extra 0.05 is actually quite important. Tom Coughlin has confidence in the guy. He's quoted as saying he thinks he's a 3-down back. He's proven to be a good pass protector. He doesn't fumble the ball. He's only fumbled it 3 times in the past 4 seasons, so that's pretty good. Runs a 4.59 40, which not as quite as fast as the Great White Hope, Toby Gerhart, but still respectable. He's not a burner, but fast enough to be a good running back. Over his career, he's got 387 carries, 1,677 yards. So that's 4.33 yards a carry. He's got 13 touchdowns. Now, here's the nice thing for PPR leagues: 97 catches, 746 yards. That's not starting anywhere. So the obvious question is, well, what about David Wilson? Is David Wilson going to, come back from his neck injury and make it so that him and Rashad split time? I don't think so. Neck surgery and running backs don't usually mix very well. And quite frankly, I just don't think David Wilson's confidence is going to be there. I don't think Tom Coughlin's confidence in David Wilson is there. Coughlin actually said, quote, "I'm counting on Wilson, but I'm not going to put him in any circumstance until he's an absolute, he's 100%. I'm not going to mess with that one." So in the long run, I think Jennings is probably RB2 with possible upside, provided the Giants don't draft another running back and their offensive line can perform. Considering the fact that Eli was sacked, yeah, you were right, Rob, in the 30s, 39 times last year. That's a career high for him. And the running backs didn't fare much better with, right around 3.5 yards a carry. So the offensive line was ranked 28th. They did sign 4 new guys and drop 3 of the old guard. So maybe there's a brighter future in New York for their running backs and for Eli Manning.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a fantasy perspective, and we have so many split backfields as it is, no knock to David Wilson, but I think, we hope that either David Wilson, has to, sit out the majority of the season, still trying to come back from that injury, and we have, a number 1 potential running back there in Rashad Jennings and the Giants. But yeah, I think all in all, at the end of the day, if by some miracle David Wilson comes back from this, neck fusion surgery, and he's 100% and medically cleared, and Coughlin has, hope for him and puts him in there the majority of the time, I definitely think he's the more talented of the two. But the reality is Coughlin's clearly scared, as we would all be in his situation. David Wilson probably himself. So he's probably one of these guys like, Gronkowski last year who's going to miss. He's going to go into the preseason and the beginning of the season probably not getting any playing time, and Jennings is going to be the guy. We'll kind of just see how it goes. We'll have to monitor that situation as we go into the preseason and the start of the year.
Well, hey, and first of all, in the immortal words of Tom Hanks, Wilson!
There you go. All right, so
David Wilson.
David Wilson.
Such a potential.
He really
honestly,
did.
He flashed it. We saw it. We knew what he was capable of. Unfortunately, he had that neck injury. It sucks. Wish him the best. Wish him a speedy recovery. But quite frankly, Rashad Jennings, who knows? You're playing in the different coasts. He could go either way. In my opinion, he's not the safest bet, but he's potentially a late round draft pick, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is you can get him in the 5th or 6th round, man. You might get really good value out of him there.
Yeah, I definitely think he can be an RB2, especially if Wilson is out for the entire season. Someone's got to carry the ball there, and Rashad showed it last year that he can do it when he was in Oakland. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and move on. Again, feel free to tweet us at Red Zone Warriors. Have any questions on that scenario, that situation? We'll be happy to answer those for you. We're going to move on to a pretty interesting running back that was signed in free agency. Mr. Knowshon Moreno, going from our heralded Denver Broncos. Man, they got their butts kicked in the Super Bowl, but we're going to try to get past that, clear off our tears, and move on. But he's going to the lowly Miami Dolphins with Daniel Thomas and Lamar Miller. So how does this affect Knowshon's fantasy value in 2014? Well, I would suggest that it affects it in a considerable way. We're talking about a running back who, is not, frankly, the next Adrian Peterson by any means. He's good at pass protection, catch the ball out of the backfield. He can kind of get the ball down the field, but he's not the most talented guy we've ever seen grace the fields of the NFL. So he's going from the number 1 offense, not of just last season, but of all time in scoring in pretty much every category, coming behind Peyton Manning and that just incredible offense with all those weapons. So he's going from that and finds himself in a situation in Miami to the 27th ranked, offensive scoring offense in the NFL last year. Behind Ryan Tannehill, nothing against him. He's an up-and-coming guy. He might have some potential definitely down the road. We've seen flashes of that. But Miami was ranked 29th in the league in rushing attempts. Obviously out of 32 teams, that's pretty horrific. Knowshon himself had more yards from scrimmage last year at almost 1,600 yards than both Daniel Thomas and Miller had combined at less than 1,400. So it's a very different situation. Knowshon was able to score 13 touchdowns. Miller and Thomas combined for only 8. So I think the biggest thing to think about here and why we think Knowshon's going to take such a tremendous hit from a fantasy perspective, you just look about, out of the 242 times that Knowshon ran the ball here in Denver, all but 50 of those times, so we're talking about 190 times he ran the ball, he was facing a defense that had 6 or fewer defenders in the box. I mean, seriously, 6 or few? I mean, he is not going to see that in Miami. That's just not going to happen. So Knowshon, he's great at pass protection. He's going to be in the game there quite a bit. For that alone, I mean, Tannehill was the most sacked NFL starting quarterback last year at 58 times. So, I mean, Knowshon was in the game because he could protect, Peyton Manning and his neck injury and so forth. Thus, he's going to get a lot of playing time, but at the same time, he's also going to face a much tougher competition in the AFC East than he did in the AFC West here in Denver. So, at the end of the day, we think Knowshon is going to be a low-end RB2 at best. I think that's his ceiling. That's the most he could potentially provide for us in the fantasy perspective. I think he's probably going to end up being a flex play for most of our teams, depending on kind of how your draft went and your strategy there. If you would have taken, quarterback or a Jimmy Graham or Calvin in the first round, he might be able to help you out. But essentially, Daniel Thomas is now irrelevant for fantasy in 2014. So you've got Lamar Miller and Knowshon there in Miami, and we'll kind of see how that plays out through the preseason.
Yeah, I think Knowshon might do a little more than you think down there. I mean, yeah, Miami sucks, but he's a little bit better than what I think they've got down there that they've had for a while. So I think you're right. He'll be an RB2, but I don't think it'll be low end. I think it could be a mid-level, possibly high end.
No, and hey, actually, Jay, I agree with you on this one. Knowshon, to me, he surprisingly, it's an interesting spot that he's in. But my point is what I'm trying to get at is that Knowshon, they had a whole deep threat that they were trying to work into the game, and that was with Mike Wallace. Mike Wallace kind of honestly flamed out. I had more hope than God that he would perform well there, and I hedged a lot of bets on him, thinking that he was going to be a true wide receiver 2 for me, and he didn't pan out. When you have a wide receiver throwing to a wide receiver, you got a problem. Sorry, whoops. Oh, Ryan Tannehill is now a quarterback. My bad. So that's an issue. That's just an issue. And without that deep threat, you're looking at just nothing but a bunch of problems. And plus, on top of this, you're looking at what happened with their offensive line. I don't even want to go into incognito situation, but you had 3 essentially starters from the year prior that are all gone. Okay, Jake Long, he left. He went to the Rams. Like, holy crap, you don't have an offensive line. So now in year 2, after all this has happened, I think there's actually some great upside there, and he might be able to perform and turn this whole thing around. So that's my thoughts on it. He could be an RB1. I don't know if I can go that far to draft him as an RB1.
Agreed.
Yeah, completely agree. I don't think he has any upside for being an RB1 in fantasy. So, all right, so we're going to move right along here. We talked about the Jacksonville Jaguars a while back there with, Rashad Jennings leaving there and so forth, Toby Gerhart taking over that role. But the guy who was the man there for several years, MJD, Maurice Jones-Drew, leaving Jacksonville, heading over to his hometown in Oakland, California, going back to his roots. This is a guy who, 3 years ago was the leading rusher yards-wise in the NFL, but has some, Liz Frank injuries in his foot over the last couple years, major injury problems heading to Oaktown, and how that affects, Darren McFadden, the most injury-prone running back we've seen probably in NFL history, quite frankly. So, Jim, what do you think about MJD heading over to Oaktown? Does he have any gas left in the tank? How's that going to affect the split between him and McFadden moving forward in 2014?
Absolutely no thoughts. I really think it's the Raiders. It's basically the abyss of hopelessness. Since 2002 and Rich Gannon era, we haven't seen anything good come out of Oakland and fantasy relevant except for Terrell Pryor and his miscellaneous 100-yard rushes, for a touchdown. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's the Raiders. They don't make sense at all, basically, in fantasy. But let's talk about what we're dealing with in this specific situation. MJD, rockstar. Guy's been phenomenal. He's done really well. He's gotten hurt the last 2 times that he's been hurt in, 6 seasons, have been in Oakland. That doesn't make sense. But he went there, and he's back in California, and sometimes you got to go back, to Cali. So McFadden, interesting situation. He got a 1-year contract. I don't understand that. Quite frankly, he was the hope of the franchise, and essentially he blew it because he only played in 19 out of 41 games. That's not good. That's terrible. So
I believe that's less than half. Do the math, crunching the numbers.
I'm not good at math, but I'm cut it by 2. I'm going to say it's bad.
You even math, bro?
So MJD, He gets a 3-year contract, $7.5 million. Are you kidding me? They brought you in. The first thing they told him is like, hey, you're here to compete to start. That's awesome. You know, if I was MJD, I'm like, hey, man, I'm almost turning 30. Everything's about to get terrible, and this is perfect. You know, once you hit that dreaded 30 mark in the NFL, like as a running back, you're pretty much written off. See Willis McGahee, 377 yards. Anyways, so MJD, what's the value here? We're looking at their former coach was Greg Olson. He's a power blocking scheme. That actually favors little tiny itty bitty MJD. He can hide behind the blockers and he can power through. And he literally, I shouldn't say power through. He's like a mighty might man. He gets through every time. So the offensive line here at Oakland, they got that 5th pick. You got to draft. You have to draft a lineman at this point, and honestly, not 1 but 2, but you got to go find out some more talent there. And my biggest thing is how much is left in the tank, because he did put on a ton of miles. Everyone likes to think like, oh, he's still young, he still got it. No, man, you took a beating in Jacksonville. I mean, when Blaine Gabbert's doing this to you, like that's an issue, you know, because he didn't know how to throw the ball. So looking at all of that. Let's talk about fantasy value. Matt Schaub is your quarterback. Good God, I'm so sorry. This is going to hurt. He doesn't have an Andre Johnson to throw to, and quite frankly, he doesn't have an Arian Foster to hand off to. But now you have MGD. So here's my thoughts. One is on the upside, he beats out Darren McFadden outright. Darren McFadden's a flop. He's a change of pace running back, so all of a sudden I'll go with MJD saying, hey, he's a running back 2. Upside, maybe 1,200 yards. That's on the plus. And downside, we're talking about a running back 4 flex. We're talking 600 yards. He's going to fill in for McFadden, which I believe, Jay, the over-under on before he gets hurt.
3 games, Jimmer.
3 games. I was going to go 5 games. I was going to say every game he plays after the first 5 games, we should do a couch shot, and because it's not going to happen.
I agree. So what we're gonna do, and I'm gonna put that in the show notes here. Every game over 5 game McFadden plays every week. You and I, Rob, are you in on this?
I'm in.
We will do a couch shot on the air for every game he plays over 5 games. You know what? Everybody tweet that at Darren McFadden. Every game you play over 5 games, these guys are gonna get drunk.
Yeah. I think this is a tough one to dissect this early on. You've got a MJD, a guy who's shown it over the years, but he's older, he's had some injuries and so forth, goes back to Oakland, paired up with a guy who can't play over 45% of the game. So this is a real issue here, and so it's hard to think that we all believe McFadden's going to get hurt at some point, MJD is going to take over, but MJD with his injury issues the last couple years, isn't necessarily just going to step in there and be an RB1 role by any means. So, we're just going to have to see how this goes. I think if you were to draft, I would draft McFadden, of course, over. I would draft MJD over McFadden just because of McFadden's injury history. But I think it's ceiling is an RB2 at best. It's more probably a flex play if you can get to that point. So we'll see where he goes in the ADP moving forward. All right, so that's it for the running backs of this show for free agency. We're going to go ahead and move on to a couple wide receivers that have gone to different teams, big names in free agency. So we're going to look at Hakeem Nicks. Hakeem Nicks coming from the Giants last year, a horrible season to say the very least. Eli Manning threw like a record amount of interceptions, the offensive line, so-and-so, such and such, but man, it was just bad. Hakeem Nicks had a bunch of injuries last year in and of himself. So we see this guy who should be, quote unquote healthy going into next season, going into the Indianapolis Colts with Andrew Luck, and how that affects not only, Andrew Luck, T.Y. Hilton, Reggie Wayne, a 35-year-old coming off an ACL, but also Reuben Randall, who's now going to be the number, 1.5 behind Victor Cruz there in New York, and how that affects that. So, Jay, do you have any thoughts on Hakeem Nicks and his potential now that he's healthy going over to the Colts, and how that affects the Colts quarterback, wide receivers, and also the New York Giants wide receivers?
Yeah, I do. first of all, I want to talk about Andrew Luck with this. I mean, I think it affects him probably more than anybody else. He was already the 4th overall quarterback last year. You're just giving him another quality target to throw the ball to. So I think he at least stays at the 4th overall quarterback, if not goes up. And you might be able to get him for a deal. He definitely won't drop out of the top 5. I think Nick's value has to go up at least a little bit. He's going to a better team with a better quarterback who stays on his feet. Like I said earlier, Manning was on his butt 39 times last year. So, Andrew Luck is a big upgrade. The Colts are a big upgrade. And really, they're kind of the same type of offense. Colts actually run a little bit more, believe it or not. I think that Hilton's value, it takes a little bit of a hit, but not too much of one. He's more dynamic. He's faster. He's a better deep threat than Nix is. But, again, he's still got one more person there to compete with, especially with Reggie Wayne coming back. I think Hilton's going to be the guy to have there, but Nix isn't going to be, too bad of a late-round flyer to grab. So, you're looking at Nix with a possible wide receiver 2. More than likely, though, he's going to be in a flex position. Hilton, wide receiver 2 with upside. And maybe if Nix has a great year, Hilton ends up as a flex play, but I don't think that's going to happen. I know that Reuben Randall, though, over at the Giants, is looking to take a big jump, at least up to a decent wide receiver 3. Possibly a flex play, even wide receiver 2, but I would be comfortable with him in a flex position. How about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, even with Hakeem Nicks going to the Indianapolis Colts, I think T.Y. Hilton is the guy to have there from a wide receiver perspective. I mean, you look back at the numbers, T.Y. Hilton, he's going into his 3rd season. He had 50 catches his first year, 82 catches his second year, and over 1,000 yards. I mean, that pretty much trumps what Hakeem Nicks has done in his entire season, career season over at the Giants. So I think T.Y. Hilton is a better player. I think he's more talented. He's clearly younger. He doesn't have the injury issues as Hakeem Nicks. So I think he's the guy to own if you're going to draft a Colts wide receiver moving forward. I think the red flag here and the wild card is, what Reggie Wayne's going to do. The guy's 35 years old, coming off an ACL. He's a possession receiver. He's going to get his catches, in a PPR league, so he's still relevant.
Well, the question is how long is he going to stay relevant? I mean, how long is he going to stay healthy? Like you said, he's 35 years old. He's coming off an injury. I mean, I would be willing to put couch shot on the fact that Reggie Wayne isn't going to last more than 6 or 7 games at the most.
Yeah, I will actually take that bet if you want to go ahead and document that. I mean, Reggie Wayne, he's a warrior. He's been in the league for several years. I think, with the progression of, surgical maneuvers and so forth with ACLs nowadays, like we saw with Adrian Peterson and RG3 and so forth, I think he's going to have his role there. But I think at the end of the day, T.Y. Hilton's the guy to have. And I think it's going to be actually relatively close between Hakeem Nicks and, Reggie Wayne in 2014 in fantasy, especially in a PPR league. So we'll go ahead and move on. Again, feel free to tweet us at Red Zone Warriors if you have any questions, on that backfield, what goes on in the wide receiver perspective between, the Giants and the Colts. Andrew Luck, I think he pretty much gets the most out of this, from a fantasy perspective, numbers-wise, adding another weapon like Hakeem Nicks into that backfield. And we'll hope Trent Richardson can get his stuff together, figure things out, and be more of an impact from a running perspective in that offense. So, last but not least, we're going to move on to probably the most controversial, most headlines, free agent signings. I mean, clearly from a wide receiver perspective here in the free agency in the offseason was Deshaun Jackson, the Philadelphia Eagles going over to the Redskins, leaving Chip Kelly's offense coming off the best season of his career. But frankly, I think, Jay, I think you know what I think of Deshaun Jackson. Yeah, so I'm not the biggest fan of Deshaun Jackson. I think he is, frankly, a prick. He's, some guy that I will definitely, I've never had on any of my fantasy teams. You're supposed to keep emotion out of fantasy, but I highly doubt he'll be in any of my teams moving forward. But you can't deny the guy's fantasy impact. He's coming off a season in 2013, his career best season in Philadelphia under the Chip Kelly offense. He had 82 receptions, over 1,300 yards, 9 touchdowns. And that's fantastic. It's good. But I think the more impressive stat for Deshaun Jackson that we've seen the last couple of years is the fact he played all 16 games. I mean, he's not a big man by any stretch. He goes across the middle. He gets his teeth knocked out. He has concussions. He may be wearing a Wes Welker size helmet next season there in Washington. But because he was able to play in all 16 games, he's a dynamic wide receiver. He blows the top off the defense. Because he played all 16, he had a career season. But the reality is he's going to a different offense, a different scenario altogether. Deshaun was 12th in PPR leagues last year. He's one spot behind his new teammate in Pierre Garçon. Deshaun averaged over 16 yards per catch, and that ranks him as 4th in the NFL for any receiver that caught over 50 balls last season. Meanwhile, Garçon himself, who's a stud, averaged less than 12 and ranked him at 31st in the NFL for any receiver that caught over 50 balls. So you can see the need there and why Washington went ahead and scooped him up. I clearly have concerns about Deshaun. He was essentially kicked out of Philadelphia after his record season because who knows, Chip Kelly doesn't like to be cussed out in front of his entire organization. Deshaun did that multiple times. He wouldn't show up at meetings. He's a liability in the locker room. That's clear. All this gang related stuff I'm not sure about, but the bottom line is they kicked him out after his best season. So that's telling to me. And he's going over to the Washington Redskins, with Shanahan leaving there. They had all sorts of issues in the locker room. Wide receivers, talking smack against RG3, and just the coach wasn't a strong coach and so forth. So I definitely have concerns about Deshaun going to the Redskins. RG3 has not shown himself to be a clear, dynamic, mature leader yet. So I think that's an issue. But you can't deny what Deshaun has done on the field. He's probably the most dynamic wide receiver, from his perspective of getting downfield as we've seen, maybe even since Randy Moss. So we have to definitely discuss him. I think at the end of the day, Deshaun Jackson's numbers, they must go down. I mean, he's coming off a career season in a different kind of offense. I don't think he'll see that again. So I think his value goes down. Andre Roberts was signed to Washington from from the Cardinals. So that that has an impact there as well. I think that actually makes Roberts probably fantasy irrelevant, especially in 10, 12-man league going into next season. Garçon, he's not going to see 120-odd receptions with Deshaun being there. So I think from a PPR perspective, his catches are going to go down. But I would think with Deshaun stretching the offense there, his yards per catch might go up and his touchdowns might go up. So I think Garçon, his fantasy value pretty much stays the same. I think he's the guy to have from a wide receiver perspective there in Washington. Jordan Reed's the big red flag. He's very talented. We saw that last year, the amount of times that RG3 went to him, but he's got concussion issues. I mean, talk about wearing a Wes Welker big helmet. I mean, this guy he has concussion issues back through college career, so we definitely have to monitor that. But I think at the end of the day, the Redskins themselves move up as far from an NFL perspective, from a win-loss perspective, and chance of getting in the playoffs and so forth from adding Deshaun. But Deshaun's value goes down. Garçon's is roughly the same. But I think the biggest winner here in Washington is RG3 and Alfred Morris. I mean, Alfred Morris is not going to see 8 guys in the box as often as he did last year with a dynamic receiver such as Deshaun being in that offense now, along with Pierre Garçon. RG3 is known for having a pretty good deep ball, so I think his fantasy value moves up. You'll probably see him in the 8 to 10 range, an ADP in 2014, as he's adding one of the best playmakers, in NFL history, quite frankly, from a wide receiver perspective. So, any thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I agree with you that Deshaun's value goes down. I actually think he gets downgraded a little bit more than what you're saying. You were mentioning his injury history. Last year he played all those games, but the question you got to ask yourself is, does he do it again this year? Is he going to stay healthy? And if he doesn't, do you even want to bother owning him? I know that I'll stay away from him, and not because he's an asshole, but because I'm afraid that the guy's going to get hit so hard that he's not going to be able to see straight. And then the concussion protocol people are going to say, sorry, Deshaun, you can't play this week.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously something to think about. I mean, Deshaun Jackson, quite frankly, Dan Snyder, I think Mike Shanahan has less to blame for this than, goddamn Dan Snyder. I mean, this is the land of misfit toys. He just buys things that he thinks are worth a damn, and I don't fully understand it. His belief in career arc that he sees in RG3 is a little bit trumped up. I believe he's highly overrated. I mean, hell, yes, hurt, and yes, he had a great few games, but dude's a stick. I mean, he's going to get hit. You can't take a hit. He's a prima donna. I mean, hell, give Kirk Cousins a start. Maybe throw in some more power rushing in there. But, I mean, yes, Alfred Morris, I'd agree, is going to have the more benefit of the doubt. RG3, Pierre Garçon's numbers are going to go down. I don't care who you are, what you think. Those are going to not be there. There's a lot of things to think of. Quite frankly, I would just stay away from Deshaun Jackson unless you're drafting him and he falls into a wide receiver 2 position. Then, yeah, take him. So that's my thoughts.
All right. We're going to move ahead to a different wide receiver here. We've got Jim the Jimmer. I have a man crush on Cordarrelle Patterson. Guy here to discuss Cordarrelle Patterson and his fantasy projections for 2014. So, Jay, what do we have for Cordarrelle Patterson?
That's perfect, Jim. The man is my hero.
Yes, he is. Let's all take a moment. Let's take a moment.
The greatest that is Cordarrelle Patterson. All right, Cordarrelle Patterson. Jay, here we go. I got this. Cordarrelle Patterson. Here's what I love about this kid. Percy Harvin takes a flyer, takes the money, goes over the Sea Chickens, gets a Super Bowl ring. Good for him. Perfect. That's exactly what they paid for. They got exactly what they wanted. But what did Minnesota do in between? They were like, hey, we need to get someone that's talented, athletic, and quite frankly, bigger than Percy Harvin so he can actually play in games, more than 6 a year. So that's basically what they got. And that's why I love Cordarrelle Patterson. Got him as a waiver wire pickup late last season. Just kind of fell in love with what this kid is capable of. I mean, he's 6'2", 230. He runs a 4.40. I mean, he's dynamite. Literally, there's unlimited possibilities of what they could do with him. The whole coaching staff essentially got Leslie Frazier and all those guys basically got moved around because they needed to give this kid the ball more often. AP is a talent, but he has no sidekick, and now he has a sidekick in something that's incredible like Cordarrelle Patterson. This year I'm seeing him doing at least 1,000 total yards. I mean, he's going to run a kick or two back. He's going to take a punt or two back. I mean, literally, he threw out the ball for the Minnesota Twins this last week, and you guys sent me the picture, give me crap. That's because he's going to be throwing touchdowns. Who's the quarterback? No one. They don't have a quarterback. That's why they need this man. That's why Cordarrelle Patterson is great. He is the second coming of awesomeness.
Of Jesus Christ, actually, I think.
Can't say that.
According to Jimmer. Yeah, we have to edit that out. Yeah, well, that's, I think we saw Cordarrelle Patterson's talent last year. That's, it was something special. I think he brings himself above Tavon Austin in that regard. He's got an opportunity there. Not that Toby Gerhart leaving really enhances that per se, but Adrian Peterson is there, and he's going to have definitely his opportunity. So, 1,000 total yards. I don't know. We'll see. But wide receiver 3, potentially wide receiver 2 with upside. Best case scenario is something that we should definitely consider for this guy. And I would definitely say he's a sleeper for us. I don't know if you call him a sleeper or not, but he's a guy that you should be kind of focusing on. Probably in the 8 to 9 round this season in your fantasy football draft. So. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the show with that. We talked about 6, relevant free agents, running backs that went to various teams, and a couple of the wide receivers. Next week we're going to discuss Michael Vick, Eric Decker heading over to the New York Jets from the Eagles and the Broncos, respectively, and how that affects their offense, and if the Jets actually have fantasy relevance in 2014. Golden Tate going over from Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks, which is unfortunate, obviously, as a Broncos fan, heading over to be paired with Calvin Johnson on the other side of the line and the Detroit Lions, and if that's going to increase his fantasy value. You've got Steve Smith and Owen Daniels from the Houston Texans going over to the Ravens, how that affects the potential fantasy value of Dennis Pitta and the wide receivers over there at Baltimore. Darren Sproles leading in the Saints, heading over to Philadelphia. Do we think he can catch another 100 balls or like he did over the last couple of years over in the Saints and Chip Kelly's offense? So that's some of the things we're going to discuss next week. This show in general, we're going to be focusing on PPR leagues is our default, so that's when we talk about their value. That's kind of what we're coming from. We'll also talk about standard leagues and so forth. As we move forward in the coming weeks and months, we'll talk about on shows the auction, blind bidding, waiver wire process and the standard waiver wire process, and who should go before who and how much money you should budget to pick up these guys on a weekly basis. The waiver wire pickups, and the sleepers like Cordarrelle Patterson, if you consider him a sleeper. T.Y. Hilton, those sort of guys, where we think they're going to fall, where we think they should be drafted. So please, we're going to be on Thursdays at noon Eastern. Please go ahead and watch us live on YouTube. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Red Zone Warriors Fantasy Football. Please go ahead and do that. You can follow us on Facebook. Facebook us some questions and like us on Facebook at Red Zone Warriors Fantasy Football Show. And please send us some questions on Twitter at Red Zone Warriors. Do you have any questions about today's show or any questions about keepers moving forward? I appreciate everyone watching today, downloading us and watching us later. Really appreciate it. And I think we are out.